He thought the locked gate kept strangers out. In 2011, on a service road above Standing Indian Basin in North Carolina's Nantahala National Forest, I watched my tires start to fail one by one after we rolled through leaf litter that didn't belong on the road. Someone had scattered roofing nails under wet leaves and then, helpfully, marked a safe lane with orange tape tied in knots that were too clean to be accidental. An abandoned vehicle sat at the trailhead. 3 hikers were still missing, and by late afternoon, a calm voice from the tree line began giving directions like it had done this before. When I finally reached a pocket of signal and dialed 911, a second voice took over the call and calmly tried to send help to the wrong access point. That was when I noticed orange tape already looped onto my own gear. Let me tell you exactly how it went. My name is Caleb, and this happened to me back in 2011 in Standing Indian Basin in North Carolina's Nantahala National Forest. I worked field operations for the county water department then. It wasn't glamorous. It was valves, sampling, intake screens, and the kind of paperwork that makes people think nothing ever goes wrong as long as the taps run. I drove a white county truck with a toolbox, a clipboard, and enough spare fittings to keep a small line alive until the next budget year. We started that morning in the yard, not because we wanted to, but because county work starts with keys and forms and the same questions every time. I signed out a chlorine test kit, a handheld meter, extra sample bottles, and a box of nitrile gloves that never fit right. Trent carried the heavier stuff like he always did, and he made a show of it because that was his way of staying in a good mood. Lena, our summer intern, stood off to the side and watched everything like she was studying for a test that no one had told her about yet. Trent tossed a coil of hose into the bed and said, "If this is another false alarm, I'm buying lunch and calling it even." He looked at me when he said it, like he wanted me to promise there was nothing wrong up there. Lena's hard hat still looked new. She was smart and quiet, and she'd learned fast that the fastest way to get respected in a field crew is to listen first. I told them, "We don't get complaints this far up unless something's wrong," and we left town around 8:10 a.m. with the kind of routine confidence you only notice after it's gone. The drive up to Standing Indian is not hard in the way a mountain road can be hard. It's just steady. The pavement turns to gravel, the shoulders disappear, and everything tightens in around you like the forest is leaning closer. By the time we hit the last stretch, the radio had turned into thin, broken talk. The county channel still came through in fragments. The state channel popped in and out. The cell phone display did what it always did in those hollows, showing a hint of bars and then nothing as soon as you actually needed them. A little after 9 a.m., we pulled into the trailhead lot to check the notice board, partly out of habit and partly because the intake access shared that area, and we liked to see if hikers were around. That was when we saw the other vehicle. It sat at the far end of the lot, a dark crossover with a skin of pollen and road dust, like it had been there more than a day. One rear window was cracked open a couple inches, and the angle of it bothered me because it didn't look like air it out cracked. It looked like left in a hurry cracked. No one was inside. No fresh trash, no cooler, no dog leash, no wet jacket on a seat. It looked like somebody parked, stepped away, and never came back. Lena pointed at the windshield. No pass tag. That mattered because the Forest Service had been using those tags for a while to keep the lots from becoming long-term storage for abandoned vehicles. Trent walked up close, leaned in, and scanned the dash. "No keys," he said. He checked the cup holder and the door pocket without touching much. Trent wasn't dumb. He just didn't like feeling unsettled. I didn't touch anything. I stood there and stared at the empty driver's seat longer than I should have, trying to build a normal explanation out of it. Maybe a shuttle pickup. Maybe somebody got a ride down. Maybe the keys were in a pack. But the window being cracked and the complete lack of clutter didn't fit the way hikers usually leave cars. Hikers leave evidence. Even neat hikers leave evidence. "We'll call it in once we hit a bar of service," I said. Trent gave me a look that said he didn't like leaving things unreported, but he didn't argue. Lena didn't say anything. She just looked from the crossover back to the tree line and then at me, like she wanted to ask if this was normal, but didn't want to sound naive. We moved on and reached the locked gate that split public access from the service road. The county had a key because the intake sat up there, feeding a small line downhill. The gate was not fancy. It was a metal bar with a chain and lock. But it did one thing well. It made people think the road behind it was off limits and watched. A Forest Service truck was parked at the turnout, engine running. The driver stepped out as we rolled up, and I noticed the wet around his cuffs and knees right away, like he'd already been in brush or down in a ditch. He looked tired the way a person looks when they've been awake worrying about something. Not sleepy tired, watchful tired. He said, "You water guys?" I nodded. "That's us." "I'm Rudy," he said. "Maintenance." He kept his hands visible, which I didn't clock until later as a sign that he was thinking about how things look in a tense situation. "You headed to the intake?" "Sampling station and the enclosure," I said. "We got a complaint from downslope about pressure drop." Rudy glanced past me toward the trailhead lot like he expected movement. "There's been issues up here," he said. "People don't stay on the trail. They follow whatever they see." Trent asked, "Whatever they see?" Rudy didn't answer directly. He nodded at the lock and said, "You've got the key?" I held it up, and he watched my hand like the key mattered more than my face. As I unlocked the chain, Rudy said, "If you see orange tape tied in clean knots, don't follow it." Lena frowned. "Like trail marking tape?" Rudy shook his head. "Not like the kind volunteers use. Different knots. Too neat. It's not wind." Trent gave a short laugh, but it came out forced. "Who's out here tying knots?" Rudy looked at him for a beat and said, "Somebody who wants you to go where they want." That sentence should have sent us back to town. It didn't, because we were county workers, and we'd heard plenty of weird talk from people who work the woods. Most of it is harmless. Most of it is half jokes and camp stories and complaints about tourists. But I remember the way Rudy said it. He wasn't telling a story. He was giving a warning like he'd learned a lesson he didn't want anyone else to learn. I swung the gate open and we drove through. Rudy followed in his truck, but he kept more distance than normal, like he wanted space to turn around quickly if he had to. The first mile climbed fast. The road was rough but passable. Wet leaves were packed into ruts in places where they shouldn't have collected, as if somebody had raked them loose and tossed them around. We passed a small pull-off where old tire tracks cut into the mud and then stopped as if whoever made them had backed out and reconsidered. At 10:05 a.m., Trent tapped the dashboard. "Hold up." I slowed because I felt the steering change first, like we'd rolled over something that wanted to move under the tires. Something dark lay scattered across the road. I got out and crouched, and my stomach tightened before my brain caught up. Roofing nails? Not a few. Dozens. Wide heads, short shanks. The kind you buy in a bucket at a hardware store. They weren't in a pile. They were spread in a fan pattern, like somebody had taken a handful and cast them across the lane. Lena said, "That's not from a truck." And she was right. This wasn't an accident. This was placement. Rudy parked behind us and waited a second before getting out. That pause made sense later. It was him listening for a second sound. When he stepped out, he pointed at the right edge of the road. An orange strip of tape was tied to a low branch, and the knot sat tight and symmetrical. Not a sloppy twist. Not something that happens by accident. Rudy said, "That's what I'm talking about." Trent stared at the tape, then at the nails. "So the tape marks what?" Rudy kept his voice even. "It marks what they want you to think is safe." I scanned the road. The nails clustered heavier in the center and left, but wet leaves covered the right edge, and wet leaves hide plenty. "We can hug the right side and creep through," I said. Rudy shook his head once. "That's what they expect." Trent looked at me like he was about to argue. Then he looked up the road at the quiet and decided he didn't want to be standing there any longer than necessary. I grabbed the flat shovel we used for sediment boxes and scraped a narrow lane, pushing leaves aside until I saw bare dirt. No nails. We moved a foot at a time. Tires rolled slow. Nobody spoke. When we cleared the patch, my shoulders eased, and then Rudy said, almost to himself, "It starts small." Around 11:20 a.m., we reached the intake area. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't dramatic. It was a fenced enclosure, a shed-sized structure for equipment, and a concrete pad with a metal door. The door was slightly open. Trent stepped forward first. "That's not how we left it." I checked the padlock and the latch, and my stomach dropped. The lock was shut, but it wasn't actually locking anything. It sat on the latch like a prop, not through the hasp. From a distance, it looked secure. Up close, it was theater. Lena said quietly, "That's staged." And she was right. Inside, the panel was open. 2 wires hung loose. A plastic housing lay cracked on the floor. Somebody had taken copper, but they'd also smashed what they couldn't carry. Trent muttered, "This is spite." Rudy stayed at the threshold, eyes moving corner to corner like he expected someone to be crouched behind shelving. I asked, "Rudy, you call this in?" He looked at me like he hated the answer. "I did. I got told it was probably kids." Trent snorted. "Kids don't do this." Lena didn't join in. She crouched near the hinge and found something small, then held it up like she didn't want to touch it longer than necessary. It was a brass tag, like a key tag, stamped with a number. No name, just a number. "Under the hinge," she said. Rudy's face tightened. "Don't keep that," he said. "Put it back." I stared at him. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because if whoever's doing this knows you took it, they'll come closer to get it back." That was the first time I believed Rudy completely. Not because of the tag, but because of the fear in the way he said it. It wasn't theatrical fear. It was the kind that lives in your voice when you've been awake too many nights thinking about a thing you can't fix. Then we heard the voice. It came from the tree line beyond the fence, calm and close enough that it didn't need to be loud. "Step out slow," it said. "You'll be fine if you listen." Trent snapped his head toward the sound. "Who's there?" No answer. Then, in the same calm tone, like it was giving directions to a lost driver, the voice said, "Take the road down. Keep right where the tape is." My mouth went dry. I couldn't see anyone. I saw leaves, trunks, and rhododendron shadow. Lena whispered, "It knows about the tape." Trent raised his voice. "We're leaving. Back off." The voice replied, "You can leave if you do it right." Rudy backed away from the door without turning his back. "We need to go," he said, and the way he said it shut down any argument. We moved together, step for step, like we were walking past a dog that might bite. When we reached the trucks, Rudy said, "No fast moves, no shouting." Trent muttered, "I'm not taking orders from a bush." I said, "Trent, not now." I got into my truck and turned the key. The dash lit. The starter clicked once, then nothing. I tried again, same click, no crank. It wasn't a dead battery sound. It was the sound of a connection that wasn't there. "Battery?" Lena asked. "It was fine," I said, and popped the hood. The battery terminals were shiny like they'd been handled. The negative clamp sat loose enough to wiggle with my fingers. It doesn't loosen itself like that on a road you've driven 100 times. Somebody had been under my hood, quietly, close. Rudy climbed into his truck and turned the key. His engine caught, idled rough, then died like somebody had flipped a switch. He tried again and got the same thing. That could have been a sabotage too, but it also could have been the same thing most old fleet trucks deal with, a cut ground strap or a pulled relay. The point wasn't what failed. The point was that it failed right then, at the worst time, after a voice told us to move. From the trees, the calm voice said, "Now you understand." Trent lost his head. He opened his door and stepped out. "This is theft," he said, loud and angry. "You're done." He took 2 steps toward the fence. I grabbed his sleeve. "Stop." He yanked free and kept going, like anger could protect him. The shot sounded muted by wet timber. It wasn't a movie crack. It was a hard thump that made Trent fold. His knees gave and he went forward without catching himself. There wasn't a dramatic spray. There was just the sudden, impossible stillness of a man who had been talking 30 seconds earlier. Lena made a sound that started as a breath and turned into panic. I dropped beside Trent and checked him the way you do when you don't want to accept the obvious. His eyes were open, but not focusing. His chest moved once, then stopped. I could not fix that with county tools. Rudy was crouched behind his open door, one hand near his radio. "Don't touch him," Rudy said. "Get down." I grabbed my phone and saw the same thing I'd seen all morning. No bars. Lena said, "Call 911. I said, "I can't. No service." The calm voice spoke again, closer now. "Leave him. Take the tape. Go right." Rudy hissed, "He's hurting you." Lena stared at Trent like she couldn't accept what her eyes were telling her. "He's dead," she said, like naming it would make it less real. Rudy leaned in and spoke fast, practical. "There's a low spot down the road. Sometimes you catch signal. You run to it and you call. You do not follow tape. You stay off the leaf edge." I stared at him. "Come with us." Rudy looked past me toward the intake building. "I'm going to pull him off you," he said. Lena grabbed Rudy's sleeve. "Don't." Rudy pulled free gently and said, "If he gets you both, nobody calls." Then Rudy slipped around the back of his truck and disappeared into the brush. A moment later, I heard a metallic clink uphill, like a tool hitting rock, and then the woods went quiet again. That quiet felt intentional, like somebody was listening to the space we made moving. "We leave too," I told Lena, and I kept my grip on her sleeve because her legs shook and she kept catching a boot on roots. We moved down the service road on foot, staying in the center of the lane where I'd scraped earlier and avoiding leaf piles like they were live wires. Every few hundred yards we saw orange tape. Some strips were tied high, like flags. Some were tied low, like breadcrumbs. Always the same clean knot. Always too neat. The voice came and went with the terrain. Sometimes it sounded behind us, sometimes off to the side. It never sounded far. "Keep right," it said once, and I did the opposite on purpose because by then the tape had one meaning and it wasn't safety. A minute later, I saw why. A thin line stretched across the right edge at shin height, anchored to brush and a small stake. In wet light, it looked like nothing. It was just the wrong straight line in a place that should have had only branches. Lena stared at it and whispered, "He's building a maze." I said, "He's trying to slow us down," and hearing myself say it made it feel more real. At 4:12 p.m., my phone flickered from nothing to 1 bar, then dropped again. That tiny change gave me hope and made the fear sharper at the same time. We pushed faster, and then we found Rudy's truck. It sat crooked across the road, driver door open, engine off. No Rudy. Lena called his name once. I didn't. I listened instead, and the silence felt layered, like it had weight. On the driver's seat, a strip of orange tape lay folded like a note. I didn't touch it. We kept moving because stopping felt like doing what the tape wanted. The road dipped into a shallow hollow, and my phone jumped to 2 bars and held. I hit 911 and put it on speaker without thinking, because my hands were shaking and I needed Lena to hear that help existed. A woman answered fast. "What's your emergency?" I said. "Nantahala, Standing Indian Basin Service Road, County Water. One of my coworkers is down, shot. We need deputies and medical." She said, "Sir, slow down. What's your name?" I said, "Caleb," and gave my last name because dispatchers always ask and because it makes you feel less invisible. I heard a soft scrape behind my left shoulder, not a footstep on gravel, a careful shift in wet leaves. I turned, but too late. A hand clamped my wrist, strong and controlled, and pulled the phone closer to a mouth that stayed out of my sightline. The grip wasn't frantic, it was practiced. A calm voice spoke into my phone like it had rehearsed the rhythm. "This is Caleb," it said. "We're at the upper gate. Nobody's hurt. False alarm. Send them to the gate." The dispatcher said, "Sir, are you safe right now?" The calm voice answered, "Yes, ma'am," steady as a utility call. I tried to wrench free and got nowhere. Lena grabbed my arm and pulled. "Let go," she yelled, and the hand released me suddenly, like it had made its point and didn't need to hold on longer. I stumbled and caught myself. That's when I saw the orange tape. Not on a tree, on me. A loop of it had been slipped onto my backpack strap, tucked under the webbing like a tag. It was such a small thing, and it made me feel owned. The calm voice, close enough that I felt breath at my ear, said, "You don't listen." Then I got shoved toward the ditch. I caught the bank with both hands, and my phone slipped, bounced, and landed in mud with the call still open. I snatched it up and said loud and broken, "That wasn't me. I'm not at the gate. He's right here." The dispatcher's tone changed immediately. "Sir, stay on the line. Tell me exactly where you are." I looked around for a marker. There wasn't a numbered post, just mud, leaves, and road. "Below the intake," I said. "We passed a Forest Service truck in the road. Please." Lena screamed, "He's coming!" And I still didn't see him. Not clearly. I saw movement that could have been branches, and that was worse because it meant he didn't have to show himself to control us. I ripped the tape off my strap and threw it into the ditch like it burned. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "Units are moving." I kept her talking. I gave her what I could. I described the gate, the turnout, the trailhead lot, the locked access, the intake direction. I told her there had been nails on the road and orange tape tied in clean knots. I heard myself saying it, and I knew how it sounded, but I also knew it was the truth. We ran. We did not follow tape. We stayed on the center of the road and avoided every leaf pile because by then, it basically was a trap. We didn't stop until we hit the gate. The gate stood open. That made no sense because I had closed it earlier, and the open gate felt like another message. Like somebody wanted the scene to look simple when help arrived. Like somebody wanted responders funneled the same way we had been. Headlights cut through the trees. A deputy's cruiser slid into the turnout fast and stopped hard enough to rock. 2 deputies got out with weapons up, voices sharp. "Hands! Hands!" I raised both hands and kept the phone up so they could see I was the caller, not the problem. The dispatcher's voice came through the speaker. "That's him. That's the caller. I've got him." A second unit pulled in behind, then a Forest Service law enforcement truck. That detail mattered to me because it meant someone had taken Rudy seriously at some point, even if it took a death to do it. They moved Lena and me behind a cruiser and asked questions in short bursts. "Who shot him? Where's the victim? Where's the Forest Service worker?" I told them about Trent. I told them about Rudy. I told them about the nails in the tape and the voice that kept trying to steer us. One deputy nodded at my pack strap. "What's that?" I looked down and my stomach dropped again. A small piece of orange tape clung there. Not the one I'd thrown. Another one, tucked under the strap loop like a bookmark. The deputy peeled it off with 2 fingers and held it up like evidence. Nobody laughed. Nobody shrugged it off. They went up the service road with more deputies and didn't let me go. They brought Rudy out first after dark, walking unsteady with his hands secured in front because they didn't know if he was a witness or part of it at first. His face looked gray under the lights. He kept saying, I told you," like repeating it would make him less responsible for being right. They brought the man out last. They stopped him near the gate line, trying to move through brush with a ring of keys and a roll of orange tape in his jacket pocket. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He just looked at them and said, calm as ever, they went the wrong way, like we'd failed a simple test. Later that night, while I sat on a tailgate with a blanket around my shoulders, a deputy told me they found the missing hiker's gear in a concealed pit near the intake. They didn't find the hikers alive. They also found a coffee can full of brass tags, each stamped with a number, like someone had been counting and recounting to make sure nothing got missed. When the paramedic asked if I wanted the tape taken off my backpack strap, I told him no. I cut it off myself in my driveway, and I left it there on the gravel until morning, because I needed to see it in normal light to believe it had happened at all.